full Oxford-style lecture. In fact, don't panic. I'm actually only going to speak for about 10 or 15 minutes, and if it's any more, my colleagues, I'm sure, will come out with a dart gun or something to get me off stage, because actually you're here to listen to the Right Honourable Penny Mordaunt, the Leader of the House of Commons, who is going to come and address you on the kind of topic of the day, which is public trust, trust in politicians, trust in government. Where do we go from here in this country? She's then going to be interviewed afterwards by Ruth Warder, who was our co-CEO of our UK business. But before that, what I thought I would do is just give you a bit of a primer in terms of our findings, trust findings this year. We launched the main global trust study in Davos in January. What you've got today is a kind of UK cut of that. So I'll refer to some global data, but you'll see principally data relating to the UK. Just for the kind of research or statistical nerds in the room, of which I'm one, this is the 23rd year that we have looked at this issue of institutional trust, measuring trust in government, in business, in media, and in NGOs. We're now looking at 28 countries. Sweden joined us this year. We had no coverage of the Nordics, so one of our board members, Helle Thorning-Schmidt, the former Prime Minister of Denmark, said we should really do that. So rather than choosing Denmark, for some reason, we chose Sweden. But anyway, that is for another day. 32,000 respondents, just over 1,000 per country. UK, though, what we do is we field in November, but because the UK is such a principal market for Edelman, we actually then boost a sample in January, and we did some field work over the 10 days, 20th of January to the 30th of January, so you get a sense of what was going on at that time. So this is an additional 3,000 people to the 1,000 or so who we've already polled in November. So you can start to get a very, I think, quite sophisticated feel for what's going on with a degree of accuracy. Okay, so the first slide, look, this shows the kind of ranking. So these are the global 27. And on the left, you can see the perceptions of trust amongst those group of people who are in higher income, so the top 25, versus on the right-hand side of the slide, those in lower income categories in the bottom 25. So you have to really scan quite down the sort of list, quite down to find the UK. You see, though, this real differentiation, this gap between the attitudes of those on lower income in terms of overall trust versus those on higher income. So in the US, actually, the gap is 23 points. You see on the back of on the far right of this slide. Interesting to see gaps, these gaps between attitudes of lower income versus higher income, actually manifesting themselves in single-party states or autocracies as well. I think that is super interesting. But the main point here is look at the UK, really very much in the distrusted category. Now, one of the big headlines of this year is around the issue of polarization and how do we navigate a polarized world. Now, to sort of define polarization, we did a bit of work this year that's expressed on this slide. Essentially, we asked people, how divided do you think your country is? From not very divided to extremely divided. That is on the y-axis. And on the x-axis, how entrenched do you think your country is? To what extent do you feel the divisions that you've expressed can be overcome? And what that's given us is essentially three different zones, right? Countries that are less polarized, with very few deep divisions. Those are in the moderately polarized space. Some divisions, but actually these are addressable. We can overcome them, they're surmountable. And then in the top right, deep divisions, where actually there's a sense that actually we cannot overcome some of these problems that we face in our country. Ideally, of course, I mean, I'm going to show you the scatter graph of where the countries are next. Ideally, you kind of want to be in the middle, I would say. And that is where countries like Canada are, where the Netherlands are, Australia, Ireland. Bottom left, interesting, isn't it, to see the groupings of countries, UAE, Saudi Arabia, China, Singapore. Severely polarized, Argentina, absolutely no surprise, Colombia, US, South Africa. I mean, it's very interesting to have a debate about what we think is going on in Sweden and Spain. But if you look at this band, which is the striped band, we are in the UK, we're in there, France is in there, Italy, Germany. And we define this band as having all of the characteristics of being in danger of shifting into the top right of the severely polarized. And of course, I mean, it goes without saying, you don't need me to tell you, a polarized society is going to really struggle to get anything done in terms of lack of institutional forbearance and just entrenched divisions. No trust, no one giving anyone the benefit of the doubt. So this is really quite sort of problematic. So that's where we sit in terms of the polarization piece. When we ask about polarization, we did some regression analysis. Okay, what are the key, of those people who say, actually my country is severely polarized, what are the key underlying trends or attitudes? High levels of distrust in government, lack of shared identity, a sense that the system just doesn't work anymore, so systemic unfairness, economic pessimism, societal fears, things like worries about job losses, worries about automation, increasingly, and we've seen it this year, geopolitical worries, though they're not expressed as geopolitical worries, they're expressed by fears around war and nuclear war. It's the sort of thing that I worried about in the 80s when I got a leaflet through the door saying if there's in the event of a nuclear war, hide under the table. But those fears are like bubbling up again. And then in terms of thinking about the information surface that we're dealing with, real worries about distrust in media or information sources. This slide is really interesting. So as I said at the beginning, we look at trust in four institutions, in government, in business, in NGO, and in media. And when we look at trust, we understand it essentially with two vectors. One is competence. Are you any good at what you do? And you deliver it predictably over time in a way that, I know you're going to. And third is ethical. Can I trust you to do what is right over time? Bottom left is where government is at the moment. So neither ethical nor competent. That is according to 3,000 people in this country. So I think you can safely say that is how people feel. What's really interesting is what's going on with business. So business is edging into the top right, pretty much always considered as competent in this country, broadly, not corrupt, kind of does stuff that they, delivers things on time, reliable. But what is really interesting is the jump in ethics. So business is now seen as both competent and ethical. There's been a 27-point jump in the ethics scale over COVID. My hypothesis on that, by the way, is that I think the furlough scheme and the fact that we, government and our taxes kept people, and borrowing kept people in work, is an ethical inheritance that has gone to business versus government. But I think that is really interesting. And it really speaks to, I think, both the opportunity and the risk ahead for business, because with high degrees of competency and a sense of ethics is also a belief that business really needs to step in and address some of the really systemic and complex societal issues that we face. And what you see on this slide is essentially the performance gap between what people expect of business and what they're doing. So take climate change. On addressing climate change, business is not doing enough. Well, 53% of people would say that, versus 8% who would say they're doing enough at the moment. You see the same gap, not doing enough on economic inequality, not doing enough on energy shortages, not doing enough on healthcare, not doing enough on reskilling, a critical issue if you think about generative AI and the impact that technology is going to have on jobs over the next. So there is a really interesting kind of expectation performance gap thing that we should be in business, we should really be worrying away about. Not least because there's another dimension of getting involved in societal issues. On the one hand, this back slide, on this previous slide, we want you to do more on climate change, reskilling, healthcare, and inequality. However, people also say that business is at risk of being politicized if you get stuck into these quite contentious societal issues. The red and the striped that represent the countries that are in either the top polarized or that band of in risk of being polarized. So there is a real risk here for business. We want you to do more. The expectation is to do more. Yet we also think there's a big risk that you could actually fall foul of politics, particularly true in polarized countries. Okay, so quickly canter through UK. No surprise here, a general sense across society of economic pessimism. Things are going to get worse, not better in the short term. So you've seen this big jump year on year in terms of people who say, actually, my standard of living is going to get worse over the next year. It was 41 last year, it's 57 now. I mean, this is we haven't seen levels like this of economic pessimism, and it's not that good when you look over the next 5 years either, when people, forecast out. So an 8-point jump. So people are very worried about their economic prospects. And more generally, they believe that the country is on the wrong track. And this is a sort of classic political question, right track, wrong track. So 2/3 of people, 3/4 of people say this country is on the wrong track. And you might think, well, this is a political issue. But actually, even if you look at those who would describe themselves as conservatively affiliated, almost half of those say this country is on the wrong track. So, there's no difference in terms of demographics, and there's not a lot of difference between low income and high income either. And part of the reason, obviously, people feel the way they do about the economy and the country's on the wrong track is because what they're actually experiencing themselves. This is a pretty sobering slide. This slide describes a range of things that people are doing at the moment or planning to do as a result of the cost of living crisis. So you've got 20% of people who are either planning to or have already used a food bank. That's a third, by the way, with the lower income group. You've got almost half of all people saying they're already dipping into spending when it comes to paying energy bills or food bills or just bills that haven't been budgeted for. People describe missing payments for credit cards, using more credit cards, so going into borrowing, missing payments on rent and mortgage and so on and so forth. So this is the actual experience of people. Either it's what they're doing today, their behaviours today, or what they're expected to do in the future. So not a lot of optimism around. And therefore, it shouldn't surprise us massively that when you look at trust in government, and it'd be interesting to hear Penny Mordaunt on this, we are at a 7-year low. 27 points. So that's 27% of people would say they trust the institution of government to do the right thing. And it's not just institutional, though. This trust issue is also manifesting itself in how people think about political leadership. So you can see the Prime Minister's trust rating has fallen by 10 points over the year, to 25%. So that's 25% of people would say they trust the Prime Minister to do the right thing. You would assume that there would be potentially a bigger inheritance, or that the Labour would capitalise on this more. It's just 3 in 10 say they trust Keir Starmer to do what is right. Now look, to be fair, it's a 5-point jump year on year, and we are kind of 18 months out from an election. So you see the numbers moving around, but it's still pretty low. But you know what? It was even lower last year. Look at how Sunak is compared to Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. Interesting to see Liz Truss's ratings today. No, I mean, genuinely, I think it'd be quite interesting. I mean that. So one of the challenges, and one of the I think quite ingrained perceptions now, is that politicians are self-interested. They create division. You see some statistics here in this slide that they're actually negatively contributing to society. I think it's so interesting when you've all read the sort of read the coverage about the death of Betty Boothroyd, and that felt like a very different time in politics to where we are today. And this is, just to sort of build that point out a bit, this sense that actually politicians are, fair or not, increasingly seen as negative and divisive forces. Now, part of the, and I'm almost done, I promise, part of the challenge to be fair to politicians is we are living in a very divided society in terms of public policy. So 72% of people would say, this country is divided on the main issues of the day. And that's true of Conservative voters as much as it is true of Labour. And it's also broadly true across, there aren't real regional variations, and there's not a lot of demographic variations or income variations. So politicians are trying to grapple with and find solutions for a world where there are very divided views. And you see it on this slide. 43% of people would say higher taxes are necessary to deliver on the difficulties we face in the country, and exactly the same number say, well, we shouldn't have higher taxes. So quite how you navigate through that from a public policy position is quite hard, which really brings me to almost my conclusion, and these are really interesting slides. So you could think that people, okay, are completely politically dislocated and switched off from politics. Well, that's not actually true. 3/4 of people say we should be dealing with this country's problems with new thinking, new ideas, and a new approach. So a complete kind of reboot of or reimagination of politics and problem solving. So think about the seismic shift with Thatcher or with Blair. So there's a real demand out there, a thirst for new ideas and a new type of politics. That, again, is true across regions and across income and demographics. And actually, 6 in 10 people say we should have an entirely new party. Now, Change UK didn't actually deliver a lot of change. And it's very, it's not like France with a presidential system. And Adam Bolton will know this better than anyone in this room. You cannot just create a political party out of thin air and answer this. But the way I would read this is not a new political party, but actually the reinvention of the political parties that we have today, I think. It's quite interesting.